those studies that began a couple of years ago is known as CIPHER. So one of the crew members is part of that human research study to provide valuable insights for future deep space missions. But again, that's just a sampling of the more than 200 different investigations that they will participate in and help researchers on Earth conduct while they complete their mission at the International Space Station in low Earth orbit. Again, the launch of Crew-10, which you can see that crew on the right-hand side of your screen, comprised of NASA astronauts Anne McClain, Nicole Ayers, JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. That launch for today that was originally planned for 7:48 p.m. Eastern, 4:48 p.m. Pacific was scrubbed with about 45 minutes left in the countdown right before the crew access arm was planned to retract. It was scrubbed due to a hydraulics ground issue related to the clamp arm, which is holding, there are two clamp arms holding the Falcon 9 rocket in place on the launch pad or the transporter erector. Those clamp arms are located around the second stage of the Falcon 9, which you can see there now on your screen. After that launch scrub was called, the teams immediately began working through processes to egress the crew from the spacecraft, but the pad team had already left the pad, so they had to drive back out. They have since arrived to the launch pad, and they are up in that crew access arm that you can see on your screen that is connected to the Dragon spacecraft at the top of the Falcon 9 rocket. And so they are working to safe the hatch around the Dragon Endurance spacecraft. Once all that safing is complete, they will open the hatch and begin to get the crew out one by one before they take them back to the crew quarters at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. So leading up to today's launch attempt, the crew actually ingressed or entered the spacecraft around 4:58 p.m. Eastern, so several hours ago now. There you can see the ground crew team currently working on those hatch safing and opening operations.
Dragon SpaceX closeout team is preparing for side hatch open in just about a minute or so.
Dragon copy.
And again, some comms from the core here in Mission Control at SpaceX in Hawthorne, California, communicating with the crew, just letting them know that the closeout team is there outside, just right outside of the hatch, working on opening that hatch for them. Again, they're still inside of the Dragon spacecraft, and there you can see them in their seats. So they can't see what's going on outside of the vehicle, which is why the core is there to help communicate. They might be hearing some noises from the closeout team working on opening that hatch. This allows them to just know and understand what to expect, that those noises that they're hearing is expected, and that they can anticipate that hatch opening here shortly. And the crew there using their pads that they would use during their flight. Those tablets hold their procedures, so they can, if they're wondering where, what they need to work through, what's coming up next in the procedure, they can look there on those tablets very easily. They were also taking some selfies earlier. Maybe some good memories of what's leading up to their future launch to the International Space Station.
You got to make the most of it, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
And the two of the crew members there on your screen are veteran astronauts, so they've flown previously. So Anne McClain as well as Takuya Onishi have both been to the International Space Station before, so I'm sure they're familiar with launch scrubs and all the procedures and processes that go into that.
Again, this is exactly why, we go through a countdown. We have automated checks. We have automated checks. We have manual checks. We have a whole team in mission control here in Hawthorne that monitor the vehicle and all of its systems to make sure that everything is good, that we have a team monitoring all the ground systems to ensure everything is good. Again, if we are not 100% sure that we are safe, that we can launch safely and reliably, we will call a hold on a launch just like we did today, and we will wait until we are ready with another backup opportunity, hopefully in the next day or two.
And again, there are several other opportunities this week. The earliest is tomorrow, about 24 hours from now. But again, waiting for confirmation from the NASA and SpaceX teams on when they will schedule that next opportunity, whether it's tomorrow or sometime later this week or even next. And there on your screen, you can see the closeout team. It looks like they're beginning to work to open the hatch. And then once the hatch is open, the crew will begin exiting one by one with some assistance from those ground teams. And just by the number of people you can see on your screen there, you can see just how big of an operation it is to launch people.
SpaceX, stand by for side hatch open.
SpaceX Dragon copies.
And Dragon SpaceX, hatch is open, so we'll be handing you off to the closeout team for egress. Sorry we couldn't get you off today, but we'll speak to you soon and look forward to trying it again.
SpaceX Dragon, we copy. We see the closeout crew. Great working with you today. Kudos to the whole team. I know it was a lot of work to try to get it to go, but like I said earlier, we'll be ready when the equipment is.
And there you heard some nice words from NASA astronaut, the commander of Crew-10, Ann McClain, talking about the scrub, but also talking about how grateful they are for all of the teams and the work that they've put into today's opportunity, even though it didn't go as they planned. But again, there are additional opportunities that will be available once the teams work through those ground issues on the hydraulic system for the clamp arms. And again, we also heard and saw on our screen a moment ago that the hatch for the Dragon spacecraft Endurance has now been opened. So those closeout team members will begin removing the crew members from their seat one by one. And then from there, the crew will go down and get into their vehicles and be taken back to crew quarters.
When that hatch opened, they waved to the closeout team. This is a team that they've been working with for many, many months, so they're very familiar with each other. And as Anna, you were mentioning, there's a lot of teams involved with a launch like this, several teams helping to make a crew launch like this happen. The closeout team working with the crew side by side, obviously the crew itself, the operations team that helps train the crew for launch. Then there's a lot of training with NASA for the science. So there's several teams that are involved with a mission like today's, and it's okay that we're not going today. We will go when every single one of those teams is ready to go.
Yep, and we also have the SpaceX mission control here in Hawthorne, as well as NASA's mission control team for the International Space Station in Houston, Texas, as well as the launch control teams in Florida. So really a huge undertaking to launch humans to space successfully. And we've been launching people now to the International Space Station for almost 25 years, with that 25th anniversary of continuous human presence coming up later this year.
Yeah, and the NASA astronauts have been flying with SpaceX for the past 5 years, since Demo 2 in May of 2020. And this will be the 10th rotational crew mission making the 11th with NASA and SpaceX.
Yep. And those crew rotations, they're also intricately timed. So the crews typically spend around 6 months aboard the International Space Station once they get up there. So the current crew rotation that's up there is Crew-9, which was the 9th rotational crew mission for SpaceX flying NASA astronauts to the International Space Station. And once Crew-10 launches and gets to dock to the International Space Station, they'll complete that handover period with Crew-9 before Crew-9 makes their way back to Earth. And then there on your screen, you can see the Crew-10 crew members working to get their hands free out of their launch and entry suits.
Yeah, these suits are intravehicular suits. They are designed for being inside of the spacecraft only. They help keep the astronauts cool. It's almost like they have a mini self AC system, but it also helps protect the crew in case of a cabin depressurization during a launch. So they're not going to egress those, or egress. I mean, the suits are kind of like a miniature spacecraft, but they won't be getting out of their suits now, but they are just getting their hands free so that they can help safely climb out of their seats and out of the spacecraft.
And typically, once we launch and the crew is safely inserted into orbit, the crew will often get out of those suits for the phasing ride as they catch up to the International Space Station to get a little bit more comfortable, since that can be sometimes a lengthy ride. If we had launched today, it was actually on the shorter end for phasing. It would have been about 10 hours to get to the International Space Station. And there we see a live look of Launch Complex 39A in Florida. It looks like the sun has fully set. And we now have one of the crew members of Crew-10 out of the Dragon Endurance spacecraft, another following right behind. And it looks like those are the two mission specialists for Crew-10, so JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. They are now safely out of the Dragon spacecraft, followed there by NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers. And then last but not least, making her way out of the Dragon spacecraft is NASA astronaut Anne McClain.
Must be nice for them to be able to stretch their legs after the last few hours sitting in the Dragon spacecraft. They are now currently in the White Room, but they'll be making their way down this crew access arm here in a moment. And again, the closeout team is there to help assist the crew, make sure they, as they were egressing the spacecraft, that they didn't damage their suits, helmets, and making sure that the crew is safe while they're in their spacesuits. These are some pretty hefty spacesuits, so might not be as easy to walk around in like normal clothes. So that's what the crew is there to help with. They're also going to make sure that the vehicle is safe before they exit the crew arm as well.
It looks like they're now making their way down the crew access arm, well away from the spacecraft that they just egressed or exited following that launch scrub. Again, the scrub was called with about 45 minutes left in the launch count when we were targeting a 7:48 p.m. Eastern liftoff. That scrub was due to a ground hydraulics issue with the clamp arm on the transporter erector that the Falcon 9 sits atop. And those clamp arms hold the Falcon 9 in place and typically retract in terminal count. And the crew will now begin to make their way down to the base of the launch pad, where they will then get into the vehicles that brought them here several hours ago. and return to crew quarters. Once they're back at crew quarters, they'll likely have some meetings with some of the SpaceX and NASA teams to talk future opportunities for their launch.
Crew 10 members making their way downstairs. This is where they will get access to the elevator that will take them down the tower to the base of the tower to their Teslas that will take them back to their crew quarters. Looks like several members of the closeout team are following right behind them.
They're getting into the elevator that'll take them down to their vehicles, and then they will drive off back to crew quarters at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida. And there you're seeing a live look of those vehicles standing by for them. Again, they've been standing by since the closeout team arrived about 45 minutes ago. After the launch scrub was called, there were a few minutes that we had to wait for the closeout team to make their way back, since they had already left the launch pad prior to that scrub being called. Once the closeout team made their way back, they then went up to the crew access arm and began safing the hatch to then egress the Crew 10 crew members comprised of NASA astronauts Anne McClain, Nicole Ayers, JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. And there you see them all on your screen as they are making their way down. They've made their way down and are going to enter into their vehicles and leave the launch pad and go back to crew quarters shortly.
Yeah, they're going to get into their Teslas. These Teslas are special made for the crew, where they have the ability to attach their umbilicals to help keep cool air flowing through their suits. Once they enter those Teslas, again, they'll make their way back down to their crew quarters, where they will stay quarantined until they have their next launch opportunity. And there you can see the crew now ingressing those vehicles. And that's going to wrap it up for us here in Hawthorne, California at SpaceX here at, next to Mission Control. We're going to send it back over to Daryl at KSC to follow the crew the rest of the way. Again, it's unfortunate that we did not launch today, but again, always better to be safe and make sure that we launch when we're ready.
Yep, and we'll continue to provide updates on NASA's blog for the Commercial Crew Program, as well as our social media accounts once we have that new launch time ready to share with the world. But for now, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here in Hawthorne, and we'll see you again soon once we have our next launch attempt for the Crew-10 mission. And with that, we'll hand it back over to Daryl at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
All right, thank you both, ladies, for walking us through the egress of the astronauts from their spacecraft down the launch tower and into their waiting vehicles. For those of you just now tuning in or happen to be catching up on what's happening, we are live at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, watching Crew-10 make their way back from a launch attempt at Complex 39A. They were scheduled to launch with a T0 of 7:48 and 57 seconds p.m. Eastern Time. However, the launch was scrubbed less than an hour before that due to an apparent hydraulic problem with the Launch Pad 39A Falcon 9 hold-down clamp arm system, the system that holds the rocket to the strong back. And so NASA and SpaceX teams made the decision to call off the launch for today. There you see the crew along with the closeout crew, our crew of 3 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut, leaving their rocket for another day. So, of course, Jessica, the understanding is, with astronauts that they're always ready, but they got to be feeling some disappointment.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's a bit of a letdown when you think you're going to space and you don't. I didn't have that scrub experience myself, but obviously it is quite common for a lot of astronauts in the office. And I think really they're just mostly used to it from their previous careers. Like we mentioned earlier, Anne often talks about being humble and knowing that your equipment it's going to fail in the least predictable of ways. So you really just always need to be ready for anything. And that's what happened here today, despite a pretty flawless lead up. It was something that we didn't expect. But we will launch when we're ready and when we're safe. And of course, that's always the most important thing when we're talking about human spaceflight. So maybe they'll have a little bit more time to relax and get ready for the next opportunity.
We're going to continue tracking the astronauts' progress back to the astronaut crew quarters, and then we will close out the broadcast. But we want to make sure that you, the viewer, see the astronauts making it back from the launch complex back to their crew quarters safely before we close it off.
And then it's a little bit like going home. Anne was talking earlier about appreciating the home-cooked food, and we have an incredible staff there at the quarantine facility. So, hey, another day of that, probably some other family visits, and they'll find a way to make good use of that time now that they have all the annoying taskless stuff out of the way that they thought they had to complete before yesterday. From what I've heard, things do stay pretty busy right up until the last minute here. So, it is probably still a little bit stressful. You're trying to reply to those last emails and send those last text messages and keep people up to date and close out different questions that people are coming to you with. So this could be a nice relaxing day for them tomorrow.
Well, it's certainly beautiful outside, as you can see here, as we are in the late twilight of today, Wednesday, March 12th. It was a beautiful day all day long today. Pleasant temperatures outside. Boats were going by the launch pad. It was a quintessential Florida launch.
This is that kind of scene that I was talking about earlier when the cars were going in the other direction, and now at night it's even more dramatic with all of the lights and the entourage leading them back. I wonder if they're playing their theme music again. Maybe not. Maybe this time they're kind of sitting in silence, and will they play the same songs on the next opportunity? That's another answer I'll have to find out.
Yeah. I mean, it's an opportunity to change up your playlist if you've got the time to do so. Historically speaking, when crews back in shuttle days were faced with delays that they knew were going to be long, they had use of the astronaut beach house. And there were opportunities to spend a little more time out there, and families were on hand. So
yeah, and there could be, we still do use the beach house in this pre-launch quarantine period where the astronauts will go out there with their families, and it's a really nice, iconic, idyllic, gorgeous setting if you've ever seen it. Nice access to the beach and to the ocean, and it just has that real beach house vibe that's pretty relaxing. So I'm not sure whether or not they'll get another opportunity to do that, but always a good option. Maybe a final run down the beach.
What I love the most about that beach house location is the solitude. It's the house and the way Florida looked before anything, came around. It's so natural. The only really significant thing that you see towering launch pads off in the distance.
But we like that.
Yeah, but that's right. Around here, we like that. But it's so pristine, and because obviously this is a national wildlife refuge, and it's a secure area, there's so much solitude out there. It's so isolated, and it's so natural.
Those sea oats waving in the breeze between the beach and the beach house. You know, I actually, my parents had a place just a little bit further up the coast here, so same kind of familiar coastline, and my mom was always commenting on the sea oats and how beautiful they were, and it's so nice to keep all those natural elements. So if they don't get a chance to go out there and relax, and maybe they can use those images that they had when they were out there earlier this week and get into a relaxing kind of state of mind. That's the one thing about the ocean, right? There's always just something so relaxing about looking at the water.
It is so true. Peace and tranquility. It's hard to not have that wash over you when you're out there gazing over the ocean. And that is just what the doctor ordered when crews are tired from a long day of launch operations and preparations. But we don't know if that's where they're headed at this time. We should caveat, because the decision has yet to be made about when the next opportunity will be, whether or not there will be some work that's required, or whether or not they have enough data to move forward with flight rationale. Of course, we'll have updates for you. Stay tuned to our social media channels as we drive by the other direction, away from the vehicle assembly building and right by our studios here at the Launch 39 complex. If you were commander of this crew, what would you do?
What would I do with the free time? I think I would try to do what I was saying earlier, really use it to relax, because I know myself, and as I was mentioning, I've heard a lot of reports from the crews being pretty busy up until the last moment. So I think I would sort of take advantage of the fact that all of those annoying things
It's about a 20-minute drive from the launch pad to the crew quarters. The caravan going down NASA Causeway. They came in on 2 lanes. They're going out on 3 lanes. Those 3 lanes are to accommodate big, heavy space hardware when it travels around the Kennedy Space Center. Fun little fact.
Certainly a great time of year to be launching, though. This weather has been phenomenal, and it's so pleasant to just be outside, which is not always the case here in Florida.
Yeah, you were asking me, prior to coming out here, like, how's the weather? I'm like, oh man, it's so good from our previous launch coverage that you and I did, Crew-7. First of all, it was overnight.
Yep.
Second of all, we were outside. I believe bugs were a factor.
Yes.
Collecting quite a few of them on the on the launch desk. But outside now, it's just, this is why people vacation this time of year. It's the high season for Florida. This is the place to be, because we have just about 6 to 7 months of summer every year. So I cherish these days in February and March.
Yeah, we know how that feels in Houston, too.
Oh, yes, you do.
We've been pretty fortunate with the weather there lately as well. Hopefully the friends and family that are here as well will be able to stick around for a little while and see what's going to happen. That's always something, you know, when we have these constant changes that can kind of become a stressor for us, is that it's difficult for people to change their schedules and their time off work to be here. So we always feel for that. And I know that happened once already with the change that they had moving off of the February plan. So see how it all works, but we will be here supporting them, and our colleagues at NASA are in it until the end for sure. So we're here to support them all the way and send them off eventually to space.
100%.
Feel like we're in the car right there with them with this view, don't we?
And we are. I wonder if they're putting in their order to the fine cooks and chefs at crew quarters for dinner tonight, because it's been a while since they ate.
Yeah, absolutely, and probably that will be definitely a bright spot on the horizon, because their meals in Dragon, there's no way to heat up the food, so it has to be something you do get some choice in what you can bring along. You can bring along some of the elements of our standard food menu that we have on ISS and some other kind of off-the-shelf varieties as well. But there's no way to heat it, so you have to have something that tastes good at the ambient temperature. So at least they will have a hot meal tonight, which they wouldn't have had otherwise on Dragon.
Absolutely.
A little bit less fun when your food's not floating, though, I have to say.
There is that fun factor.
Absolutely.
It's room temperature, but capturing it out of midair.
Yeah, it's okay to play with your food in space. Don't tell your kids.
Right. That's not something that you and I, as parents of toddlers, are currently doing.
Yeah, exactly. It would be a different ballgame with a toddler if all of the food was floating. Oh, imagine that.
Can you imagine that? Wouldn't that be like such an impetus to get them to eat?
Toddlers in space would be cute, but very messy.
Oh, no doubt about that.
Well, I know that would be top on my list when you asked what I would be doing if I were the commander and had a scrub. And that would be definitely some squeezing and cuddling of my toddler.
No doubt. You've got a young one at a precious age, as do I. Enjoying every moment of that.
I assume it would get a little confusing for them, though.
Yeah, I know, right. Especially at that age where, it's difficult to completely understand what your mom or dad is saying. Well, we have arrived back where we started, at Astronaut Crew Quarters, as the gull-wing doors open up. And there you see our Crew-10 crew members waving to somebody who's out there.
Yep. Looking slightly less enthusiastic.
Slightly less. But that's okay. They will fly eventually. This we know. It's just a matter of figuring out when, as they hustle into the doors. Well, folks, that's going to do it for us today. We really appreciate you joining us for this launch attempt of NASA and SpaceX's Crew-10 launch to the International Space Station. Thank you so much, Jessica, for being here with us on this first attempt. You'll be with us on the next one. We greatly appreciate that as well.
Yeah, thank you. It is a pleasure, really an honor to be here supporting my colleagues on their journey to space, and this is all just part of the journey. Everyone's is different.
Absolutely. Just to recap really quickly, we had an issue with some ground equipment, the hydraulic equipment that controls the clamp arms on the Falcon 9 transporter erector, holds the rocket to the pad. It releases at about 4.5 minutes. There was an issue, and they're going to look at that, look at the data, and then decide whether or not to have some work to do or maybe some further data reviews before they decide on a launch date. So make sure you stay tuned to updates that we will have for you. Just head to nasa.gov/blogs/Crew-10. You see it at the bottom of your screen there. We'll have all the information you need to know once we have that available on the next launch attempt. For everybody here at NASA and SpaceX, I'm Daryl Nail for Jessica Muir. We'll see you next time.